I'll get started, and I'm hearing it's still a little bit quiet, so I'll try and speak loudly. So as I said, my name is Michael McKisson. I am a professor of practice at the College of Information Science. I have been with the UVA for 15 years. I am also a visual journalist. I am a contributing photographer for Arizona Luminaria, which if you've been following the news, you may have heard a little bit about recently. If not, you can ask me about that later. And I'm going to tell you, because it sounds like I might need to use this, if the train comes and it gets loud, you won't be able to hear me. So we're going to play a little quiz. I'm going to have photos. When the train comes, thumbs up if you think the photo is real. Thumbs down if you think the photo is AI. We'll see if we have to do that. It sounds like we might have to. In addition to working with the Arizona Luminaria, I'm also a drone videographer, and I freelance for Arizona Public Media, PBS, Inside Climate News, that sort of thing. Today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about 5 steps for identifying and spotting fake election media around visuals and audio and video. So, some context that I think is important. This isn't a new problem, right? We think that AI has led to this challenge. But even before AI, we had similar problems. Photoshop, right? It became very easy to manipulate an image using Photoshop. Even before Photoshop, we could manipulate photos by editing them, by the way we cropped them, by the way we selected what images we were going to post. So this isn't a new problem. That's the first context piece. Technology probably won't save us. I often hear from people who say, what's the tech fix to solve the tech problem? But the reality is, when you have a technology problem and you try and fix it with technology, technology just improves. And you have this issue which is called an arms race. Real or fake? Okay. Fake. Right, so good job on the thumbs down, nice work. Real or fake? Oh, I see a lot of thumbs down, that one's real. Dang. All right, real or fake? I got some reals, I got some fakes. That one was fake. Real or fake? Ooh, this table is conflicted. We got some reals, we got some fakes. It's real. Real or fake? I hear a real, I see some thumbs up. That one's fake. All right, real or fake? Got some thumbs down. Yep, that one's fake. Oh, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, real or fake? Ooh, some real ones? Fake. All right, real or fake? You got a fake over here? Sorry, you're wrong. That one's real. All right, real or fake? That one's fake. President Biden is a civilian, would not wear camo. All right, let's go back to the presentation. I'm sorry, it sounds like maybe you can't hear. I'll try and be louder. All right. So, as I was mentioning, it's not new. Technology probably won't save us. And laws may help, but they're not going to solve the problem. And the reason why laws won't solve the problem is, do you think Russia or China, who are trying to manipulate our elections, are going to care about American laws? No. Right? And by the way, this is the only real image that you will see in this entire presentation. and it's sort of related to the fact that we can pick and choose what images we want. This one makes Tim Walz, VP Tim Walz, look a little goofy, right? I asked AI to create an image for this slide about an arms race, and this is what it came up with. That's our arms race. All right, so what does AI do, though? So it's not a new problem, but AI makes it easier and faster for people to share mis and disinformation, right? It makes it easier for everyone to share that information. These are a couple images that popped up on my Facebook feed recently, and so I took some screenshots of them. Real or fake? Both of them? The one on the left is real, the one on the right is also fake, and I'll show you why. The depressing truth about disinformation is that it's a big challenge. Still can't hear me? So the depressing truth about mis and disinformation is that it's a big challenge. So there's been 3 studies that I want to highlight really quickly. The first was an MIT study that found that false news, fake news, misinformation, disinformation travels farther and faster than real news. Right? So even if you try and correct the fake news, it's too late. It's already traveled across the internet. A recent study in 2023 found that about 15% of the most active social media users on the internet account for 40% of the misinformation and disinformation spread. And then a 2024 survey or research study found that basically political extremists on both sides, so it was not Republican or Democrat, it was Republican and Democrat, the most extreme political folks were the most susceptible to sharing fake news, misinformation, disinformation. And in that same study, they found they share it so fast that by the time any social platform has their intervention in place, taking it down, it's too late. It's already been shared so many times that so many people have seen it, it's too late. So I'm going to tell you what I tell my students about spotting these election misinformation, disinformation photos and videos. So this is based on a really popular sort of methodology called SIFT, but I go a little bit farther. This is how I do it as a journalist. I asked AI to create an image that was a compelling image that included the word spot. And it gave me this leopard print person. So the first step in spot is to be skeptical. So as a journalist, we're trained to be skeptical. In fact, if my mom says she loves me, I go ask Dad, does she really? Right? So your first step is just to be skeptical of what you see in the media, anywhere, really. It's really interesting. I teach undergrads who have grown up in this culture where they don't know if they can trust what they're seeing, and they believe nothing. If they see it on the internet, they do not believe it. It doesn't matter where it's coming from, which is a real problem, right? Because if they're getting legitimate news and information, but they don't believe it, because they don't believe anything, it's equally an issue. So step 1, be skeptical. Step 2, pause. Pause before you post. This is really about evaluating your own feelings when you see a piece of information. Studies have shown that people who are trying to get you to share mis and disinformation are playing to your emotions. How does this piece of video, image that you've seen, how does it make you feel? Does it make you really angry? Does it make you really excited? That is a huge red flag that something's wrong. right? So pause before you post, right? We go back to that study. The most aggressive online users are just sharing information, right? What you should do is pause before you reshare that and ask yourself, do I want this to be true? Do I want this to not be true? Am I having an emotional reaction? And why would someone want me to share this? What's the agenda behind this piece of information? Step 3 is to observe. So here you're really looking for those sort of telltale signs that AI comes up with. Anybody notice their hands here? Right? Who holds a magnifying glass that way? Nobody. Right, so you're looking for those telltale signs. You're really looking at the image. So let's look at a couple real quick. What do we notice about this image? I can't hear any of you. Nobody's wet. And who wears jeans to go wading in the water? Maybe. What else do we notice? The light's different. Also look at the text. You can't read it. It's not actual letters. The whole image itself is blurry, right? It's really soft. And then also check out the hands, right? This image was shared 149,000 times on Facebook, right? There it is, the hand. All right, so this is an image that was shared when I took the screenshot almost 1,000 times. This is supposedly Congress Street, so just a couple blocks south of us, looking west to the mountains. Anybody notice anything? It's a little hard to see probably. First of all, does that look like the Tucson Mountains? No. Why does that guy not have a head? Why are those tire tracks look like they're maybe from construction vehicles? Why is the electric poles going nowhere? Right? So observe, really look at those images. I'm going to be really honest with you, this was a TikTok that was shared during the polar vortex. This got me. I thought this was real. So you can't hear her, but she's talking about how the water just freezes in midair because it's so cold. Right? If you look down here, you can actually see where it melted the water or melted the snow. And she came out 2 days later and told us how she did it. Right? It was totally fake, but this one got me. I wanted it to be true. All right. So I'm going to have you do something. I hope this works because we've got the audio set up. Close your eyes, actually, because I want you to listen to this without seeing it, and then we'll watch it once you see it too.
Hi, I'm Carrie Lake. Subscribe to the Arizona Agenda for hard-hitting, real news and a preview of the terrifying artificial intelligence coming your way in the next election.
Okay,
like
now open your eyes and you can look
AI
around too.
Deepfake the Arizona Agenda made to show you just how good this technology is getting. Did you realize this video is fake? Well, in the next 6 months, this technology will get a lot better. By the time the November election rolls around, you'll hardly be able to tell the difference between reality and artificial intelligence. But don't worry, the Arizona Agenda is going...
Okay, I'm not going to make you keep listening to that. I actually think the real issue right now is audio. When you watch that woman, Carrie Lake, talking, you could see, well, it's not really Carrie Lake, but you could see her mouth, and you could see that it was weird. The audio, when you had your eyes closed, that was a lot tougher. There's still some issues with audio, but really you want to do step 4, which is trace. Where is that information coming from? Who posted it? Where did you see it? Was it on social media or was it on a news site? Who's the original source? So just a couple, and I know I'm running over time, so I'm going to go a little fast. So a couple of quick ways you can trace information. One, use reverse image search. So this is just a quick video of me using reverse image search on that Trump video, or Trump photo, excuse me. So I threw it into Google Image, reverse search. The first thing that pops up is Snopes debunking the fact that it's real. Right? So you can click on that, you can see that Snopes is telling you, hey, this isn't real. There are some tech tools you can use. Site Engine right now is my favorite. It's free for now. The problem with these tools is they are free for a while, and then they start to charge. Site Engine is free for the moment. You can throw in an image, and it will tell you whether or not it believes it's real or fake. Here comes the train again. I gave you my quiz too early. So the one real image in the entire slide deck is saying that it is not AI generated. Everything else, AI generated. So Site Engine, good tool. And then just Google. Google the story. So this is me Googling Donald Trump, Helene, waiting in water. Right? Is any legitimate news organization reporting on it? If not, that's a good sign it's not real. And then step 5 is change your sources. Instead of utilizing social media as your sole way of getting information, go to legitimate news sites. So Arizona Luminaria there, excellent, you should do that, you'll hear more about them in a moment. New York Times, Washington Post, ACPM, right? Go to the news site or follow them on social media so that you ensure that you're getting high quality news and information. Don't do what my mom does and get your news from Facebook groups. Not a good place to get information, right? I have to fact check my mother all the time. So my mom says she loves me, I fact check her. Mom sends me some shady news, I fact check. Right, so get high quality news. I'm going to end there. Thank you very much. I'm sorry that the audio was rough. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to chat with you afterward. Thank you.
I'm Irene McKisson. You might notice that our names are the same. We are married to each other. That's why. I am the co-founder of a local news organization called Arizona Luminaria. I spent 20 years in local news at the Arizona Daily Star and left about 3 years ago to start a nonprofit site to cover local news in Tucson because we need more journalists in the city to be able to cover local news and get people information that they need. And I'm going to talk about that mostly today. So we're going to talk about election news burnout and the feeling that everybody has, which is like, I'm tired already and we're not there yet. And I would just like to check out and not do any of this and not listen to any of it again. I do not have that luxury as a person who is covering the elections, but I feel it as a regular person who has to fill out my ballot and figure out who to vote for and tangentially get all of the information that maybe I don't want to have but is forced on me in every online venue that exists that I come across. So I feel it deeply. I would also like to get off the election train. But here we are, 19 days to go. I want to be an informed voter, right? I want to do my job as a voter, but every time I open the news, it makes me feel bad, or it makes me feel sad, or it makes me feel angry, or it makes me feel one of those emotions. You're not imagining the fact that the election is now 364, 5 days a year. It has gotten so that the election cycle is the entire year. And it's hard to know what's real, as we just saw. It's really hard to trust anything. So you're constantly doing this internal calculation of, I saw this story, can I trust it? Do I have to go do all of these things to try to figure it out for myself? How do I figure it out? So we're going to talk about how you can figure out what's real and why these things are happening. Like, it's not your imagination. We're all feeling this, right? Only a quarter of people in a 2024 Pew study felt that local politics news was helping them understand local politics, that it was high quality. And that's because there's fewer sources of local news. newspapers, the business model is failing, and so at the Arizona Daily Star, where I worked when I started in 2003, there were 200 people in the newsroom, and now there are 20. So it's not an exaggeration to say that we have lost local journalists. So part of this feeling about your high-quality political news is just that we've lost hundreds of journalists in a city of 500,000, a metro area of 1 million people, and there just aren't enough people to get you the information that you need. And we're not the only place. This is happening everywhere. Trust is low, right? And that's because of AI, it's because of the election cycle, it's because of politicians, it's because of misinformation, it's because of the internet. There are lots of reasons, but it's hard to know who to trust. And as journalists, we feel that very deeply and are trying to correct some of the harms that we ourselves have caused by working with communities to cover them better, underserved communities where we've done a very poor job of covering the community, but also explaining to people what our process is and how we get to A, B, C, or D. Exactly. Part of this problem is also local versus national. So when I go out and talk to people, we do a lot of listening at Luminaria to say, like, what should we be covering? We go out to communities and ask them, what should we be covering? And one of the things we have learned in doing that work is that we cannot go out and ask, how do you get your news? Because if we ask, how do you get your news? People say CNN, or they say Fox, or they say ABC, or they say any of the litany of large, big, corporate-owned chain cable news, which is not what local news is at all, right? And so we have learned that we actually have to go out and say, how are you getting local information? Because that gets us an answer that gets closer to where are the gaps in the information you're getting and how can we fill them. So part of that is local versus national. And I think if you're trying to figure out how to fix news burnout for yourself, trying to do a little bit of an audit of where you're getting information can help. So if you look at a week in your life and you kind of track, was this a national source or a local source? And try to weed out the national and do more local, it starts to feel better. And there's studies about this. There are peer-reviewed studies that say that communities who have high-quality local information and people who read a lot of high-quality local information have lower numbers of polarization. Like polarization is lower in communities that have great local news. And that's because that national rhetoric increases polarization, but local issues where your neighbor and you agree on something, even though you might be voting for different presidential candidates, makes a big difference in feeling like humanity, right? And taking down the tone. It also, by the way, high-quality local news also leads to lower taxes, which is a nice side effect. So, what do journalists do in elections? I wanted to give you a little bit of behind the scenes of like, how do we do this and what does it look like? Part of what we do is doing the work for you, like trying to gather for you, what is the date that you need to send back your ballot? It is October 29th, by the way. So if you have a ballot in the mail, you've got to get it in the mail by October 29th. So we do some of that work of like combing through all of those. I don't know if any of you got the ballot pamphlet. They call it a pamphlet. It was 350 pages, right? So part of our job is to comb through that ballot pamphlet and pull out the things that we know to be really important and that people are going to want the answers to, and then turn that into information for you to get to. So some of that is like key dates. Some of it, as you can see, you probably can't see, but we do like a voting FAQ. Like, what does curing my ballot mean? What if somebody calls me and asks to cure my ballot? I don't know what that is. We have some information about that. What if I can't vote? What do I do? That kind of stuff. We also look at like campaign finance reports. I don't think any of us are going to go home and be like, ooh, I'm so excited to go through the campaign finance reports to understand where the money in this race is. Like, nobody wants to do that, but they want to understand what's happening. So we do that for you. We try to do guides, we try to be helpful. And that's part of what Luminaria has done, is to try to, we've done an entire big guide on the propositions, for example. There are 13 state-level propositions and then more local propositions. And your ballot is actually 2 pages because of that, and they're so confusing that it took us weeks to put this thing together, to comb through it and try to explain it in like everyday language and not get it wrong. And so I think that's part of, I'm going to go one more and then back up, part of what local journalists do, like real good sources of information can do for you is fact check. We call some of the CQing, it's Latin and it's a journalism nerd lingo thing that you can use. So we CQ everything. It takes us a long time, and we go through everything and check every name. We check every date. We check every address. We check every kind of fact that we can check against. We fact check that way. We go through and make sure that everything is as accurate as it can possibly be, and if we've got something wrong, we fix it and then we tell you that we fix it at the bottom. And those things, I'm telling you that we can see that they're doing it. I'm going to back up one here though. So the bigger question there though is like, how do you decide what you're going to do? Like, how do you decide that stuff? How do you decide what you're going to cover? For us, because we're a small organization, we cannot cover every single race. We can't cover every single ballot proposition. And by cover, I mean go to every event, go to the candidate and ask them every week about something and write a story every week. So we have to be choosy. And there's that choosiness of like what will we cover, but there's also the choosiness of how will we frame that coverage, and that I think is another thing to look at. At the national level and in traditional journalism, we call it the horse race, right? I don't know if you've ever heard that, like horse race coverage of an election, which is really like, we're covering an election like it's a game because it's a game. And so it's more like a basketball game or a horse race than it is, how am I going to understand who to vote for, and how do I understand what my elected official is actually doing now that I've elected them. So at Luminaria and at good trusted sources, what you'll see a lot of is topic-based questions. We try to think about how to be fair in a race. So I've got out here, we're covering the Pima County Sheriff's race. If you followers of Luminaria, you will know that it's been fraught this week, and I've had a very long week on a Thursday. But the sheriff's race we picked in particular because it's a local race that doesn't get a ton of coverage. You're not going to find that on the New York Times, hopefully, unless something very bad has happened. But you do need to understand what's going on in it, right? Because you have a ballot that has this race on it, and you don't know how to vote necessarily. You haven't been covering or like watching every single day what the sheriff is doing. And so for us, this was really important for us to cover because we knew there was a gap there in information we wanted to be able to provide. Also, we have covered the jail very closely, and so we wanted to make sure that we're also, as an extension of that coverage, closing the loop for everybody and covering the sheriff's race because the sheriff is in charge of the jail, which is related to our issues this week, but I'll talk about that after. You can buy my beer. The other thing is that we, as part of our ethics as a journalism organization, have election blackouts, which you might not know as a lay person, right? So election blackout is that 2 weeks, a week before the election, we don't cover anything related to the candidate unless it rises to the level of somebody might change their vote based on this information. And we do that for fairness because we don't want to swing an election with our coverage unless it is absolutely justified because something wild has happened in the race. So there are ethics like that around what we do in addition to the fact checking that I think is helpful to know as a person who's trying to decide, like, do I trust this source or not? News close to the election is becoming more and more common, and you'll see it in the national news. You might see it less locally because we are, still following some of those ethics and guidelines. Okay, so I talked about CQing. You can say that every day if you want to. Be like, did you CQ that? I say that all the time. The other thing about local news that I think is very different for us, there's this national thing where Arizona's a swing state, right? You hear that all the time. Arizona's a battleground state or swing state. What that means is sometimes we're red and sometimes we're blue, and right now we're purple, and neither party wants that to be true. They want us to be one or the other, and so we just get a constant influx of politicians politicians who would like to convince us to go one way or the other. But what that means national media-wise is that the national media also comes in, and we call it parachuting in as local news organizations. It's very frustrating. But you can tell it as a reader, too, when somebody comes in and writes about the place where you live and where we live, too, and you read it and you're like, that's not quite right. Like, that's not exactly the context of that situation, or that's not how I would have described this city or this state or whatever it is. There's so much more of that because of our status as a battleground state, and it's really hard to kind of sift through. So just keeping that in the back of your mind as you look at the national stories about Arizona and comparing those stories to the ones that are written by people who are your neighbors, and people who are at the grocery store with you, and people who also understand what part of town this is and why you would call it, this one thing when you would, that's not the east side, what are you talking about? So, Mike talked a little bit about social media and how to tell what's true and what's not true. This is how people get election news. So, it's Google, and it's Facebook, and it's YouTube. It's how I get a lot of information. I see a lot of TikToks, but I don't see local information that helps me fill out my ballot on TikTok. But I might Google it. So I thought I would show you just a little peek into what people are searching to find our election guides, because I can see on the back end of my analytics what people search to find our election guides, and this is what they're searching on Google. Literally what people type in, right? Pima County Sheriff candidates, Pima County Sheriff election, Arizona Propositions 2024, who is running for U.S. Senate in 2024, Prop 133, Arizona, and I'm sure all of us are putting in the props, right? Like, I saw a sign, what is this Prop 140, what is this Prop 139, what is this, even I, after 13 propositions, was like, I don't know what number we're on, I don't know what this is. And so this is what people are looking for, and when they look for it, they're finding our coverage, which is great for us, but it's also a reminder that when you have your ballot in front of you and you're Googling Prop 133, to think about these sourcing questions of go deeper into Google maybe. Don't pick the first one, take a little look at who is what. And when you find the website, go to their About page. And make sure that there are things on the About page, first of all, that there are real people and email addresses associated with it, and that you know who they are. And do you want a partisan source, or do you want a non-partisan source? And see what you got there, because there's a lot of partisan voting guides, and maybe that's what you want, but know what you're getting when you get it. If you don't want a non-partisan site, or if you don't want partisan and you want to do the research like we do it, I just have some ideas for you here. This is how we find the information in the beginning. I know everybody's looking over here. So if you want to check your districts, you can go to aclelections.gov. If you want to follow the money, you can go find all those finance reports yourself. If you're like, who is this person? Where is their financing coming from? You can go to fec.gov, you can go see the money.ez.gov, you can go to PIMA.gov, campaign finance, and you can go get all those reports, because those are required to be filed. It's kind of boring, and we try to do it for you, but if you're into that kind of thing, this is a fun way to do it. If you want to see, here's somebody I voted for 3 times, but I don't understand this last thing they did, you can go to Ballotpedia and see how they are voting in the legislature, for example. What did they vote on? What bills did they sponsor? That's a really interesting thing to go do. School boards and judges. I know a lot of people ask me about that, and we try to do as much as we can, but it is very difficult because there's so many judges and so many school boards. So one thing to do is that you can see every school board member's statement as they're running, a school board candidate's statement. On PIMA.gov, they have everybody's statement, which is really interesting. And then for the judges at azcourts.gov, you can see anybody who's been under investigation, and you can see how they all did on their reviews, which will tell you a little bit, but not everything. And that's it. If you want to get our email newsletter and you're interested, there's a QR code, you can get it. But also, even if you never go look at these Luminaria, I hope that you get a little bit of understanding of how to go do it and make yourself feel better. And we're all going to get there, and we're going to make it, and it's going to be over someday, hopefully in a Everybody cross your fingers.
Great. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Greg Chism. I'm assistant professor of practice at the school or the College of Information Science. I almost said it. I'm going to talk about polling data, so it's continuing the training, really exciting, really energetic concepts. I guess I'm the only one who got maybe I was pumped into doing Doctor Who themed stuff. So it's in the title. The gist is that we need to start thinking about how election uncertainty is portrayed in visuals, okay? So I brought this up because we're all kind of feeling like this. In reality, I'm pretty much, well, the joke that I thought about saying or not is I'm reading a book about human sacrifice, and it's more fun for me to read that than to think about the election. So, in general, that's true. It's a pretty good book. It's called Harvest Home, if you're interested. So let's take a moment. We're going to play a game. You have a 90% chance of winning. Okay, guess what happens? You lost. How does that make you feel? Kind of bad, right? Especially because you saw 90%. Well, we're pretty bad at judging uncertainty, right? When we see something over 50%, we're typically thinking it's going to happen, right? Especially when you start seeing 90%, it's just very unlikely that it's not going to happen. In this case, we had a 10% chance of losing. 1 in 10 playing this game will lose. It's just that I rigged it, but you know, in reality, you still had that chance. I just gave you the simulated effect. You had a 90% chance of winning. It's really nowhere near a certain win. A certain win is 100, but there's still a chance. So what about this one? We saw these polling results, these predictions around 2016. We saw 71.4% predicting Hillary Clinton was going to win, 28.6% saying Donald Trump was going to win. So what happened? Hillary lost, Trump won. So how do we reconcile this? We have to think about, and I know it's really statistics-based, probability versus certainty. Probability means that there's still a likelihood that something that looks like it won't happen will happen. In the case of the 2016 election, a 71.4% chance for Clinton meant she was favored, but not guaranteed to win. And obviously, that 28.6% is still quite significant. So then we start asking ourselves, well, why have polls become so bad? Why have these polls become less effective at predicting outcomes? We've got both sides of it. So we have all of this wave of news. We have stuff like failed polls in 2016 call into effect something that we don't need to read more about. In reality, though, it's not actually that bad, right? So if we think historically, since back, what was that, 36, 40, pre-1990, those bars, the blue is essentially underestimating the Democrats, the red is underestimating the Republicans. So we can actually see that it used to be much worse. We used to be off by probably 10 plus points, right? Then we had 2020 with a huge overestimation for Biden. So it was around 3.9 points overestimating him. So that is bad in the broader context of perhaps 50 years. But before we had kind of more modern polling techniques, it was actually much, much worse. It's just, of course, we only remember the last election cycle 2 years ago, right? So my first takeaway is, it's not super bad, it's not doomsday, it's just a little inaccurate. But the reality is these elections are so close anyway, it's just polling is becoming less effective. One other thing I want to note, it's okay, you don't have to read the text, but the general idea is that all of those different colors are different types of polls. So the goal of this figure is to show you that over time, the types of polling has dramatically changed. We've gone from primarily phones, right? So you call, you do like a poll of some kind, to now being priority through online. So I have a list of the different types of polls. I'm not going to read out all of the details. If you want to read them, so this website is hosted at electionsucks.com. I bought that domain. I'm not selling it, so don't ask. So just the types of polls that there are public opinion polls. There are baseline benchmark polls. There are brush fire polls. There are tracking polls. There are exit polls. There are push polls, and there are straw polls. It's like a bad Dr. Seuss rhyme or something. But the reality is that when you mix all of these different types of polls with the methodologies, you start to get a little confused, and it's confounding, right? So the idea is that these different avenues perhaps can give us a better insight into polling information. However, we aren't really quite sure what goes wrong yet. So what I want to think about now is the dangers of favorability with outcome. So these are pretty popular through things like 538, and now there's Nate Silver, whatever he's got going now. Point being, you always get some favorability, all these little dots, and we'll discuss what they are in just a moment. But the idea is that you get the big numbers, 28 and 100 for Trump, 72 and 100 for Biden. You're like, that's pretty good, but remember, we've seen this story before, and we overestimated Biden in the 2020 election. So what that tells me is we need to just take a step back and breathe a little bit. So then we might ask, well, does favorability come from polls? So this is a favorability plot, and then really all you need to know is this is Kamala and Trump. It looks like literally the chances in that say they both have a 1 in 2 chance, right? So we're like, oh great, this comes from polls? Well, not always, so that's kind of exhausting as well. So in this case, this is, I believe, from Bloomberg. It has some economics data tied into it as well. You're going to have a bunch of different people that have their own formula for being able to predict something like an election outcome. This is big money, right? So let's think about election uncertainty a little bit more. So this, I can't scroll down, but this is the actual embedded website. This is where accuracy and precision really matter for places like 538. They have a bunch of different types of plots that tell you how likely it is for one of them to win, right? We'll go through a few of them, and we'll discuss the purpose of the plot, so why are we actually using this? We'll discuss the big pro behind using that plot, and then the big con. So thinking about what should you be focused on when gauging opinions off of that. So we can already see 52 times out of 100 or so. So it's super tight. So let's start with simulations. This is where these type of X person is favored to win. So you can't really know, you have to predict. And so what's happening is these are predicted outcomes based off of several factors. So it's a model, so it's something, math, that is saying, I put all this inside, it's telling me X number out of 100, it's this person, 72 out of 100, it's that person. But the thing to note here is that 28 times in this one, it's a victory for Trump, 72 simulations, it's a victory for Biden, right? So the idea is that you're seeing this range of possibilities. In this case, that axis is based off of electoral college votes. The biggest pro in this case is it kind of gives you a sense of build-up and possibilities. You have a general idea of where we might be going. The biggest con is that it's a really big data overload. How can you actually really see anything discernible about 0.1 right here and 0.2 right next to it? You can't really know, unless you can hover over it, perhaps. So this does make interpretation difficult when the simulations are super tight. One thing I want to note is this danger of favorability with maps. I'm not going to discuss maps a whole lot. I think maps are really easy to misconstrue. We know the whole land doesn't vote shtick, but with favorability, you start seeing shades of color inside of each of the states, and that becomes pretty uninterpretable without a scale. So it's just one of those, be careful when you see a bunch of maps that show favorability. It's going to be pretty difficult to actually interpret them. The next one we're going to do is obscurity or blurriness. So this is it's kind of this like little snake that shows outcomes. So each of these little blocks are a state. The shade of the color, if it's darker, it's more favored to go to one candidate. If it's lighter, it's more of a toss-up. So guess where we are? We're probably right here, in the middle. We're right at the toss-up. We're going to always be gray. It's going to shift literally daily, sometimes even hourly, based off of the new poll, right? The general idea, though, is that fogginess is actually a pretty powerful metaphor. We know that if something is lighter, perhaps we put less emphasis on it, and we're putting more emphasis when we're going and veering away from it down a path. The pros in this case is it's a pretty intuitive metaphor. You can understand that the axes at either side of those is actually quite easy to tell who's going to win it. So it's probably like Florida, Texas up there in red, California way down in blue, for instance. And then you can see this toss-up zone. The biggest con in this case is it's pretty subjective to different interpretations, and it's really difficult to show uncertainty. You just get shades of whatever. Shades of blue to red to gray. It's really difficult to understand, well, but what is the actual error in each of those predictions? It's quite substantial usually. So let's think about error bars and lines. I'm going to have to actually just crouch down and click the next one. But anyway, purpose in this case is to indicate some level of uncertainty in a way that's quantifiable. Dials are great. We know dials a lot because they're basically a dashboard plot. Dashboard plot because they come from like our car dashboards, right? So we can understand if something's going one way versus another, and there's usually some sort of color banding around it that helps you determine what's going on. There is this infamous point where the dial jittered. So this is, I'm glad you can't read it, it's pretty vulgar. The idea is that there was actually a period of time when this is the New York Times, they called it like their dial plots. There was a point where it was literally twitching, like one way or another, and the reality is that's just kind of, it's unacceptable, right? Especially from a data visualization practitioner's perspective. So the big pro in this case is you can compare multiple things together in several dials, and it can be relatively easy to understand it, right? The dial is pointing in one direction, or it's pointing in another, okay? The biggest issue, though, is that details in the data can get really lost if you're not representing it properly, right? You're trying to read the text. So, if you can't actually understand, what is happening in those bands, for instance, and it's right on the border of a line, it's going to be difficult for you to understand what that actually means. So the next one, some people might like them, some people might hate them. These are distributions. So distribution is showing all of the data points along one axis in this case. The higher those dots are, the more, in this case, simulations there are, right? So in the case of distributions, you can see the entire spread of possible values. This is in reality taking what we saw with those simulations and plotting it in terms of how likely it is, basically, the number of simulations going up, right? The biggest pro in this case is that you can make judgments based off of the entire sample, and not just something in the middle, like a mean or an average, or the middle value, the median, right? A lot of times when you're seeing values that are pointing one way or the other, it's because it's some average. And you never really get a full understanding of how much errors are coming out, especially when it can be a few points, right? The biggest issue is that distributions can need additional explanation. So if you aren't aware of when I say things like, this is pretty symmetrical, meaning that the odds are probably 50-50 one way or the other, if you don't know what that means, I have to explain. Symmetry means that you have to fold it on top of itself and it basically is able to cover itself. Or if I'm talking about if it's skewed, meaning it's not symmetrical, it's going one way or the other. There's just additional things that I have to explain if it's not the perfect situation. And this is, for some reasons that are quite obvious, can be positive, right? Text, you're getting all of that information. So in this case, these are different odd likelihoods of different parts of the race. But we can see that it's a lot of information. It's actually hard for me to fit it on this slide, right? So this is a table of different odds, however many of 100. the purpose of having a table like this is it's typically pretty helpful to see different outcomes for different projections and forecasts, right? So you can actually see multiple forecasts instead of just one, perhaps. It's pretty, it's great when you want to have uncertainty displayed pretty explicitly, when you want to actually know what those odds are. But too many possibilities can really just lead to text. It's just too much information. It's an overload, right? So now we start thinking, now what? And this, honestly, that emoji gives me a headache because it's vibrating. But now what? Well, the general conclusions that I like to propose anyway with this talk is that you should know that 28.6% gives a significant likelihood for candidate success. So it's just a general idea that if you see a low number, that number is still a likelihood of success. If it's 0, no odds, but if it's not 0, there's still a chance. Understand that polls have changed a lot, but overall, polling is still pretty accurate. We're off by maybe a few points or so, but the races are so close, it just really becomes difficult to expect anything else, unfortunately. That's why Nate Silver was fired. Polling is actually much more accurate when you get closer to the election, but there's still going to be some issues, right? This just, for me, that's my saying, we're getting pretty close, but I don't even start looking until a week out. It's almost exit polls at that point. And I would encourage you to pick the visual that is clearest to you. If you're more stats focused, distributions probably work. If you like more of the overall spread of odds, maybe simulations are better. If you like all the information, tables might be better. But the biggest takeaway is just take a breath. It's almost over. It really is. But that's it for me, so thank you everyone.